The desert sun beat down on Fort Carson like a hammer on an anvil, turning the Colorado training grounds into a furnace that separated the dedicated from the desperate. Established in 1942 as America prepared for global war, the base had evolved into something far beyond its original purpose. It was no longer just a training facility, it was a forge where the military's finest were tempered into weapons sharp enough to face threats most Americans would never know existed. There are soldiers you see on television, medals gleaming on dress uniforms, speeches delivered in congressional chambers, parades with flags and fanfare. And then there are the others, the ones without medals on their walls, the ones whose service records disappear into classified archives sealed by presidential authority, the ones who carry scars instead of ribbons, secrets instead of commendations. They don't make the news. They don't give interviews. They exist in the shadows between what the public knows and what keeps them safe at night. This is the story of one of those soldiers, and the day she was forced into the light. Captain Eleanor Blackwood arrived at Fort Carson on a Tuesday morning in August 2024, driving a nondescript sedan that could have belonged to anyone. No fanfare, no welcoming committee, just another transfer processing through the administrative complex with paperwork that made the staff sergeants nervous. The duty officer, a career administrator named Phillips, who had seen 20 years of routine transfers, found himself staring at documents that didn't make sense. Eleanor's file was a patchwork of redactions. Black bars covered everything meaningful. Previous assignment? Redacted. Deployment history? Redacted. Commendations visible through the digital encryption, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor device, but the citations explaining why she'd earned them were buried under classifications he'd never encountered in 2 decades of military service. "Ma'am," Phillips said carefully, his eyes tracking between the screen and the woman standing before him, "I'm going to need to verify some of this information with higher authority." Eleanor simply nodded. No frustration, no impatience, just that calm, patient silence that would become her signature over the following weeks. She was 42 years old, though she could have passed for younger if not for something ancient living behind her eyes. Average height, athletic build that suggested functional strength rather than gym vanity. Auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun that hadn't shifted despite the 100-degree heat outside. Her uniform was immaculate, but worn in ways that told stories to anyone who knew how to read them. The way the fabric had faded slightly around the knee patches from countless hours in prone shooting positions. The microscopic wear on her cargo pocket from carrying the same leather journal in the same place for years. Phillips made 3 phone calls. The first 2 went to offices at Fort Carson that kicked the question up their respective chains of command. The third call went directly to the Pentagon, to an office whose existence he had to verify through 2 separate directories. The voice on the other end was clipped and final. "Captain Blackwood is authorized. Her presence is not subject to standard verification protocols. Process her transfer and do not make additional inquiries." The line went dead. Phillips looked at Eleanor with new wariness. In 20 years, he'd never received instructions quite like that. Eleanor signed the final forms with precise handwriting and walked out into the August heat, carrying a single duffel bag that contained everything she owned. The first week passed like water through a sieve, present but leaving no trace. Eleanor was assigned to Company B, 3rd Battalion, a mixed unit of soldiers undergoing advanced tactical training. 200 men and women who had already proven themselves capable in conventional operations and were now being evaluated for specialized assignments. These weren't fresh recruits. These were professionals seeking to become exceptional. And from day one, Eleanor made them all look ordinary. The alarms shrieked at 0500 hours, dragging soldiers from bunks into the pre-dawn darkness, where Sergeant Vivian Ashford waited with the kind of aggressive enthusiasm that marked career NCOs who genuinely enjoyed watching people suffer. 12-mile ruck march. Ashford's voice could have cut steel. Full combat load, 65 pounds minimum. You've got 30 seconds to be in formation, or you're starting with push-ups. The temperature hovered at 15 degrees Fahrenheit. At Fort Carson's elevation of 6,035 feet, the thin air turned physical exertion into a test of will as much as fitness. Soldiers stumbled into formation, breath forming clouds in the darkness, bodies still fighting the transition from sleep to readiness. Eleanor appeared in formation exactly on time. Not early, not rushing, simply there, as if she'd materialized from the shadows. Her ruck was precisely packed, weight distributed with mathematical precision. Her boots were laced with tension that would prevent blisters over distance. Everything about her preparation suggested this wasn't her first 12-mile march. It probably wasn't her 100th. Ashford's eyes found Eleanor immediately. There was something about the new transfer that bothered the sergeant, though she couldn't articulate exactly what. Maybe it was the way Eleanor stood at attention without visible effort, as if military bearing was simply her default state rather than something requiring conscious maintenance. The march began in darkness, boots hitting packed earth in rhythm that would deteriorate over the next 2 hours as fatigue separated the capable from the struggling. By mile 3, soldiers were falling behind. Private Hayden Sinclair, 22 years old and built like a college linebacker, was breathing hard, his face flushed despite the cold. Corporal Sullivan Brennan, a weapons specialist with a decade of service, had developed a limp from a hot spot forming on his heel. Eleanor maintained pace at the front of the formation. Her breathing never changed from the controlled rhythm she'd established in the first 100 meters. Her heart rate, if anyone had been monitoring it, never exceeded 140 beats per minute, well below the threshold where performance degraded. Mile 6 brought the first vomiting. A soldier who'd skipped breakfast and pushed too hard bent double at the side of the trail, losing what little was in his stomach. Others slowed, struggling with the altitude and weight and accumulated fatigue of days of training that never seemed to end. Eleanor finished 8 minutes ahead of the main formation, not running, not sprinting to prove a point, simply maintaining a pace that was sustainable and efficient and happened to be faster than everyone else could manage. She wasn't sweating. Ashford watched Eleanor drop her ruck with precise movements, check the contents with methodical attention, and then stand at ease, waiting for the rest of the company to arrive. There was no celebration, no satisfaction, just that same calm competence that made Ashford want to find something, anything, that would crack that professional facade. "Show-off bitch," Ashford muttered under her breath, quiet enough that only the soldiers closest to her could hear. But her tone carried, and the sentiment spread through the formation like smoke through a barracks. The shooting range at Fort Carson was a cathedral to controlled violence. 50 firing lanes stretched across acres of carefully maintained impact area, with berms designed to stop anything up to 50 caliber rounds. The air smelled of gunpowder and cleaning solvent, sounds punctuated by the steady crack of rifle fire as soldiers qualified on their assigned weapons. M4A1 carbine qualification was straightforward. 40 rounds at varying distances. 23 hits out of 40 constituted passing. Good soldiers managed 35. Exceptional shooters approached 40. Eleanor loaded her magazine with movements so practiced they appeared unconscious. Chamber check, sight picture, controlled breathing. The fundamentals that every soldier learned in basic training, executed with precision that suggested they'd become autonomic responses years ago. The targets popped up at 300 meters, 40 rounds, 40 hits. Brennan, serving as range safety officer, walked downrange to verify Eleanor's target after the shooting line was cleared. He expected to see a tight grouping, maybe a 6-inch cluster that would indicate excellent marksmanship. What he found instead made him call for the range master. Every single round had impacted within a 2-inch circle at center mass. Not just close, not just accurate, mechanically identical. The kind of precision that suggested Eleanor wasn't aiming at a target so much as simply placing bullets exactly where she intended them to go. "That's not human shooting," Brennan said quietly to the range master, a grizzled warrant officer who'd been qualifying soldiers for 30 years. That's what we get from mounted weapon systems with computer-assisted fire control. The range master studied the target through binoculars, then looked back at Eleanor, who was field stripping her rifle with the same methodical precision she brought to everything. "Run her again at 500 meters, the range master said. "I want to see if it was luck." 500 meters, beyond the standard qualification distance. Eleanor loaded, acquired targets, fired 40 rounds in a rhythm that never varied. 40 hits, same 2-inch grouping. Brennan watched her clean the rifle afterward, and that's when he noticed something that made his professional curiosity turn into something closer to suspicion. Eleanor was making micro-adjustments to the barrel assembly, tiny corrections that required tools most soldiers didn't carry. She was compensating for barrel harmonics, the microscopic vibrations that occurred during firing and could throw rounds off target at extreme distances. "How did you know the barrel was 0.02 millimeters off specification?" Brennan asked, unable to keep the question contained. Eleanor looked up from her work. Her eyes met his for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to acknowledge the question, not long enough to suggest she planned to answer it. Then she returned to cleaning her rifle, and Brennan understood he'd been dismissed. The hand-to-hand combat pit was a sand-filled circle where soldiers practiced the close-quarters techniques that might save their lives when ammunition ran out or situations deteriorated into the kind of desperate struggles that happened in dark rooms and narrow alleys. The instructor, a former Army Ranger named Davidson, who'd survived 3 deployments and more bar fights than he cared to remember, paired students randomly. Size and strength mattered less than technique and aggression. Combat wasn't fair. Training shouldn't be either. "Blackwood," Davidson called out, reading names from his roster. "You're up with Sinclair." Hayden Sinclair stood 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighed 230 pounds. He'd played defensive line in college before joining the military, and his arms looked like they could bend iron bars. He wasn't trying to be intimidating, he just was. Eleanor stood 5 feet 7 and weighed maybe 140. The physical mismatch was obvious to everyone watching. Colonel Garrett Thornton observed from the elevated platform overlooking the training pit. He'd made a point of watching Eleanor since her arrival, trying to understand what made her different, what made her files so classified, what made the Pentagon nervous enough to seal her records under presidential authority. "Let's see what the mystery woman can do," Thornton murmured to his aide. Davidson signaled the start. Hayden moved with the cautious respect of someone who'd been taught not to underestimate opponents based on size. He advanced with his hands up, looking to establish a clinch where his strength advantage would matter. 8 seconds later, Hayden was unconscious on the mat with a dislocated shoulder. The silence in the training pit was absolute. Eleanor had moved with speed that didn't look rushed, fluid, economical, precise. She'd redirected Hayden's momentum, used his strength against him, and applied a joint lock that combined Krav Maga efficiency with Systema principles in a way that wasn't taught in any Army combative's manual. The medic rushed forward, checking Hayden's vitals and confirming the shoulder dislocation. It would require medical attention, but wasn't life-threatening, just painful and humiliating. "What the hell technique was that?" Davidson asked, his professional curiosity overriding protocol. Eleanor was already stepping out of the pit, her breathing unchanged. "Improvisation," she said simply. It was a lie. That combination of techniques was taught in exactly one place, the classified close-quarters battle course that JSOC operators attended before deployment to the most dangerous assignments on Earth. But Eleanor didn't explain. She never did. That night, the whispers began in earnest. The mess hall at Fort Carson was a study in controlled chaos. 300 soldiers moving through a cafeteria line that served food with more emphasis on calories than flavor, finding seats at long tables where conversations ranged from sports to politics to the eternal military tradition of complaining about everything. Eleanor sat alone at a corner table. always the same table, positioned where she could observe the entire facility with minimal effort. Her leather journal lay open beside her tray, and she ate with methodical precision while writing notes in handwriting so small that no one could read it from a distance. 3 tables away, Sergeant Vivian Ashford held court with a group of female soldiers who'd gravitated toward her natural charisma and aggressive confidence. Vivian was 29, blonde, with the kind of sharp features that photograph well and intimidate easily. She'd built a career on being harder, tougher, and more aggressive than anyone expected, and she defended that reputation with the fierce territoriality of someone who'd fought for every scrap of respect. "I'm telling you," Vivian's voice carried across the mess hall with practiced projection, "there's something seriously wrong with Blackwood. 6 weeks here and nobody knows anything about her. That's not normal." Specialist Lillian Mercer leaned forward conspiratorially. Lillian was a communications expert with technical skills and social awareness in equal measure. "My friend in admin said Blackwood's file is 80% redacted. Half the information requires clearance levels that don't even exist on this base." "Exactly," Vivian replied, satisfaction evident in her tone. "Nobody just shows up with that level of classification unless they're hiding something. And look at her." All eyes turned toward Eleanor's corner table. "She sits alone, never talks to anyone, acts like she's better than the rest of us. That's not dedication, that's arrogance." Private Hayden Sinclair, his shoulder now in a sling from that morning's combat training, shook his head with frustration that bordered on anger. "It's insulting, honestly. We've all earned our spots here through years of service, deployments, proving ourselves in the field, and she just appears with mysterious paperwork and gets treated like she's special." The conversation drew attention from neighboring tables, creating ripples of interest that spread through the mess hall. Soldiers paused their own discussions to listen, drawn by the unusual topic of someone who'd managed to remain mysterious in an environment where privacy was nearly impossible to maintain. Corporal Brennan joined the conversation from an adjacent table. During weapons training, she made adjustments to her rifle that require knowledge of ballistics and barrel harmonics that go way beyond standard marksmanship. When I asked how she knew the specifications, she just walked away, like the question wasn't even worth answering. "That's what I'm talking about," Vivian said, her voice rising with vindication. "Zero respect for fellow soldiers. Zero interest in team building. During training, she performs with what looks like minimal effort while making everyone else look incompetent. That's not professional excellence. That's contempt." Captain Thornton listened from his position near the officers' section of the mess hall. He'd been tracking Eleanor since her arrival, and what he observed troubled him on multiple levels that he couldn't quite articulate. Her mysterious background suggested connections or classifications that could supersede his authority. Her performance made other soldiers look inadequate, which reflected poorly on his command. Most importantly, her presence created questions he couldn't answer, and Thornton had built his career on being the officer who had all the answers. He approached Vivian's table with the measured stride of someone whose mere presence altered conversations. The soldiers immediately shifted from casual discussion to formal awareness, straightening posture and moderating tone. "Sergeant Ashford," Thornton said, his voice pitched to carry beyond their immediate circle, "I couldn't help but overhear your concerns about Captain Blackwood. Perhaps you'd like to share those observations with someone who can address them." Vivian's eyes lit up with the satisfaction of someone whose complaints were finally being validated by authority. "Sir, it's not just me. Multiple soldiers have expressed concerns about Blackwood's attitude. Her behavior seems inconsistent with the collaborative environment we're trying to build here." Thornton nodded thoughtfully, playing the role of the concerned commander weighing unit welfare. "What specific behaviors have you observed that concern you?" "She doesn't participate in group activities, sir. Doesn't engage in the team-building exercises that create unit cohesion. During downtime, she isolates herself instead of bonding with fellow soldiers. And during training, she performs exercises with what appears to be minimal effort, while achieving results that make everyone else look inadequate by comparison. Brennan added his voice from the neighboring table. "Sir, if I may, Blackwood's performance suggests she's either not being challenged by our training regimen or she's not taking it seriously. Her capabilities exceed standard parameters in ways that raise questions about her qualifications and background." Thornton absorbed their complaints with the expression of someone carefully weighing multiple perspectives. In reality, he was calculating political advantage. Taking action against Eleanor would demonstrate his willingness to maintain standards, regardless of mysterious connections. It would eliminate a source of uncertainty that had been bothering him since her arrival. "Your concerns are noted," Thornton said with the gravity of someone making an important decision. "Unit cohesion is essential for mission success. Any factor that undermines that cohesion needs to be addressed promptly and decisively." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the expanding audience of soldiers now listening intently. "I'll be conducting a comprehensive evaluation of all personnel to ensure everyone meets the standards expected at this facility. That includes assessment of both technical capability and collaborative attitude." The soldiers nodded approvingly, satisfied their complaints were being taken seriously by someone with authority to implement solutions. What none of them realized was that Eleanor had heard every word. Her corner position wasn't coincidence. Years of operational experience had taught her to process multiple conversations while appearing disinterested. She heard Vivian's criticisms, cataloged Brennan's observations, noted Thornton's maneuvering, and she understood, with the cold clarity of someone who'd survived situations far more dangerous than mess hall politics, that the careful balance she'd maintained for 6 weeks was beginning to deteriorate. She closed her journal and secured it in her cargo pocket with practiced precision. The notes she'd been making weren't about training exercises or tactical observations. They were psychological assessments, profiles of soldiers who might become problems, evaluations of leadership failures that could get people killed in actual operations. Vivian Ashford exhibited classic alpha female territorial behavior combined with deep-seated insecurity about her competence. Recommends psychological evaluation if this were an actual assessment protocol. Thornton demonstrated command insecurity masked by aggressive assertions of authority. Tendency to view subordinate excellence as personal threat. High risk for poor decision-making under stress. The coalition forming against her was predictable, almost textbook. Eleanor had seen it before in other contexts, other assignments, other lives. But this time felt different. This time, she couldn't simply disappear into another classified assignment when things got complicated. Because this time, she was here for a reason that went beyond her own survival. That night, alone in her barracks quarters, Eleanor opened the locked footlocker she kept beneath her bunk. Inside was a single photograph, protected in a waterproof sleeve, edges worn from years of handling. 12 soldiers stood in desert camouflage against a background of Iraqi sand and concrete. Young faces with old eyes. Warriors who'd volunteered for a mission they knew might be their last. Eleanor's finger traced across the faces, whispering names like prayers. Jonathan, Marcus, William, Sarah, Thomas, Rachel, David, Michael, Elizabeth, Isaac, Alexandra. 11 names, 11 faces, 11 stars tattooed between her shoulder blades where no one could see them unless she chose to reveal them. One face was circled in red marker. Captain Jonathan Hayes, 38 years old, father of 2 daughters, the finest tactical commander Eleanor had ever known. The man who'd ordered her to survive when everyone else died. The photograph was dated March 1st, 2003, one day before Operation Nightfall, one day before everything changed. Eleanor was 22 years old in that photo, fresh-faced despite the deployment tan, scared despite the confident posture. The youngest member of a 12-person team about to attempt something that intelligence analysts gave less than 40% probability of success. She traced Hayes's face one more time, her finger following the line of his jaw, the crinkle of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, despite the weight of command. "I'm sorry I came back without you, Johnny," she whispered to the photograph. "It should have been me." The memory came unbidden, as it did most nights. Hayes in the Fallujah safe house, reviewing mission parameters one final time. "Ellie, you're the youngest, but you've got the sharpest tactical mind I've ever seen. If this goes sideways, if we get compromised, you extract the intelligence. That laptop is worth more than any of our lives. That's not a request, that's an order." Eleanor, 22 and terrified but trying to hide it. "I won't leave you behind, sir. I won't leave anyone behind." Hayes had smiled then, sad and knowing and already accepting something Eleanor couldn't see. "You won't have a choice, Lieutenant. Promise me you'll survive. Promise me you'll make it matter." She'd promised, and she'd survived. And for 21 years, she'd been trying to figure out how to make it matter. Eleanor closed the footlocker and locked it with hands that trembled slightly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more tests, more questions she couldn't answer without compromising security protocols that existed for legitimate reasons. But the storm was building. She could feel it in the way soldiers looked at her, the way Thornton calculated angles, the way Vivian rallied support for concerns that seemed reasonable on the surface, but were really just fear dressed up as professional critique. Soon, very soon, someone would push hard enough that Eleanor would have to choose between maintaining cover and revealing capabilities that would raise questions she'd spent 21 years avoiding. The briefing room at Fort Carson smelled of old coffee and nervous sweat. 200 soldiers filed into metal chairs arranged in precise rows, their conversations creating a steady buzz of speculation about why they'd been summoned for a special session. Colonel Thornton stood at the front, his uniform pressed to razor precision, studying notes on his tablet with intense focus that suggested important decisions were being made. Behind him, a projection screen displayed only a title: Performance Assessment, All Personnel. Eleanor entered last, selecting a seat in the back row where she could observe without being observed. Her leather journal rested in her lap, ready for the detailed notes she'd been making since arrival. Something about the energy in the room felt different today, more charged, more purposeful, like invisible currents were building toward an inevitable storm. Sergeant Ashford positioned herself 3 rows forward, surrounded by the informal coalition of soldiers who'd become her supporters. Their whispered conversations and pointed glances in Eleanor's direction made their focus clear. Thornton called the room to attention with crisp authority. 200 soldiers snapped to their feet in unison, the sound of their movement echoing off concrete walls decorated with inspirational quotes about courage and sacrifice. When they settled back into seats, the silence was absolute. Everyone understood they were about to witness something significant. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thornton began, his voice carrying the measured cadence of rehearsed remarks. "This facility exists to prepare elite soldiers for the most challenging assignments our military faces. That preparation requires not only individual excellence, but the ability to function effectively as part of a coordinated team." He paused, allowing his words to settle like declarations of principle that would guide whatever came next. Over the past several weeks, concerns have been raised through proper channels about unit cohesion and the collaborative spirit that forms the foundation of military effectiveness. These concerns have been documented, evaluated, and deemed significant enough to require immediate address. Eleanor's pen moved steadily across journal pages, documenting not just Thornton's words, but the reactions they generated throughout the room. She noted soldiers shifting uncomfortably when he mentioned collaboration concerns. She observed others nodding approvingly when he emphasized immediate action. She watched Ashford's group exchange satisfied glances when he referenced issues raised through proper channels. What interested Eleanor most was Thornton's body language, the slight tension in his shoulders suggesting he was operating outside his comfort zone, the way his eyes avoided certain sections of the room while speaking, the careful word choices indicating he was following a script rather than speaking from conviction. This wasn't a commander addressing legitimate training concerns. This was an officer who'd been maneuvered into taking action that served someone else's agenda. Military service, Thornton continued, voice gaining strength as he moved into familiar territory, is fundamentally about sacrifice. Not just the willingness to sacrifice your life for your country, but the daily sacrifice of individual preferences for the greater good of the unit. Soldiers who cannot or will not make that sacrifice represent a threat to mission success and the safety of their fellow service members. The room remained silent, but Eleanor could sense the shifting energy as soldiers began understanding this briefing wasn't theoretical. Someone specific was being targeted, and most of them had a good idea who. Thornton's eyes swept the room with practiced authority, making eye contact with soldiers throughout the assembled group before finally settling on Eleanor's position in the back row. Today's evaluation will test not only individual competence, but also the willingness to demonstrate the collaborative spirit that separates true soldiers from individuals who happen to wear uniforms. The words hung in the desert air like a challenge, and Eleanor understood that the careful neutrality she'd maintained for 6 weeks was about to be tested in ways that might force her to abandon the protective anonymity she'd cultivated. Behind Thornton, the projection screen flickered to life, revealing a detailed training scenario that made several soldiers lean forward with interest. Urban warfare, hostage rescue, mock Fallujah compound. Eleanor's hands stopped writing, her breathing caught. For just a moment, the professional mask slipped, and something raw and painful flashed across her face. Because she knew that compound. She'd been inside it. She'd lost 11 people to its layout, and now Thornton was going to make her go back. The projection screen displayed architectural blueprints that turned Eleanor's blood cold. 3-story residential compound, intersecting corridors, multiple entry points, windows positioned at angles that created overlapping fields of fire. It wasn't similar to the Fallujah building, where Operation Nightfall had died. It was identical. Someone at Fort Carson had accessed classified mission files and recreated the exact structure where 11 American operators had been ambushed 21 years ago. The building where Eleanor had made 4 trips into hell and come back with bodies and a laptop and survivor's guilt that weighed more than both. Thornton's voice continued, oblivious to the storm building behind Eleanor's carefully controlled expression. Teams of 4 soldiers will be assigned randomly. You'll have 30 minutes to develop tactical plans, then execute live scenarios in front of the full battalion. Success will be measured not only on tactical soundness, but on your ability to incorporate input from all team members and demonstrate collaborative decision-making. Eleanor's pen had stopped moving. Her journal lay forgotten in her lap. She was staring at the blueprint with the intensity of someone watching a ghost materialize in daylight. The corridor where Hayes had taken rounds covering her extraction. The stairwell where Marcus Dalton had bled out despite her desperate first aid. The 3rd-floor room where Sarah Brennan had died instantly from a headshot before Eleanor could reach her. Every detail was correct. Every measurement precise. Someone had done their homework. The question was whether this was coincidence or something worse. Team assignments are posted outside, Thornton announced, gesturing toward the exit. You have exactly 30 minutes to develop your approach before presenting to the evaluation panel. Report to your designated planning rooms immediately. 200 soldiers stood, the sound of their movement creating waves of noise as they filed toward the exits. Eleanor remained seated, her eyes locked on the blueprint, her mind running calculations that had nothing to do with the training exercise Thornton thought he was conducting. If this was the Nightfall compound, then the obvious breach points were traps. The front entrance opened into a fatal funnel with interlocking fire lanes from elevated positions. The western approach looked clear, but led directly into a corridor with no cover and multiple ambush positions. The eastern windows faced afternoon sun that would blind anyone trying to provide overwatch. She'd learned these lessons in blood, watched friends die because intelligence had been wrong and command had been arrogant, and 12 operators had walked into a building designed to kill them. And now Thornton wanted her to do it again. Eleanor finally stood, moving toward the exit with mechanical precision. Her training was asserting itself, the operational discipline that had kept her alive through situations where hesitation meant death. But underneath that professional control, something older and darker was stirring. Memories she'd spent 21 years trying to bury. The assignment board outside the briefing room was surrounded by soldiers checking team compositions. Eleanor shouldered through the crowd, her eyes scanning the printed lists until she found Team 7. Captain Eleanor Blackwood, Corporal Sullivan Brennan, Private Hayden Sinclair, Specialist Lillian Mercer. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't random assignment. This was surgical strike planning. Brennan had been vocal about her mysterious technical knowledge. Hayden was still nursing the shoulder she dislocated during hand-to-hand training. Lillian was part of Vivian's inner circle, present for every mess hall complaint about Eleanor's antisocial behavior. 3 soldiers who had reason to distrust her. 3 soldiers who would question every tactical suggestion she made. 3 soldiers who'd been selected specifically because they wouldn't make this easy. Thornton was testing her, or trying to break her, or both. Eleanor committed the names to memory and headed toward the designated planning room, her mind already calculating probabilities and outcomes. She could participate minimally, let them develop their own plan, watch them walk into the same mistakes that had killed Operation Nightfall. Safe approach, maintain cover, but guaranteed failure. Or she could intervene, use her knowledge to guide them toward success, and reveal capabilities that would raise questions she'd avoided for 6 weeks. The planning room was a windowless concrete box with a metal table, 4 chairs, and a detailed blueprint of the compound mounted on the wall. Brennan, Hayden, and Lillian were already present when Eleanor arrived, their body language broadcasting hostility before anyone spoke. Brennan sat at the head of the table, spreading out tactical diagrams with the confidence of someone who'd assumed command by default. His decade of military service and weapons expertise gave him legitimate credentials for leadership. His ego made him deaf to input that contradicted his initial assessment. Hayden paced along the far wall, his nervous energy manifesting in constant movement. The sling supporting his injured shoulder was a visible reminder of Eleanor's combat capabilities, creating resentment that colored every interaction. Lillian occupied the corner position, arms crossed, expression broadcasting skepticism. Her communication expertise made her valuable for coordination, but her loyalty to Vivian's coalition made her predisposed to view Eleanor as a problem rather than an asset. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Eleanor entered and took the remaining chair without greeting or preamble. She opened her journal to a fresh page and waited. Brennan broke the silence with aggressive authority. "All right, we've got 30 minutes to plan a hostage extraction. I'll take point on tactical approach. The scenario is straightforward. 3rd floor hostage, unknown number of hostiles, 12-minute time limit." He tapped the blueprint with decisive emphasis. "We go in hard and fast, frontal breach through the main entrance, maximum firepower, overwhelming speed. 2-person assault team, 2-person overwatch and perimeter security. Speed and aggression are our primary assets here." Hayden nodded enthusiastically, drawn to the simplicity and decisiveness of Brennan's plan. "Exactly right. The longer we wait, the more time hostiles have to adapt or relocate the package. Hit them before they know we're there." Eleanor studied the blueprint while they talked. Her eyes tracked corridor angles, window positions, structural load points. Every detail triggering memories she tried to forget. She saw Hayes checking corners, weapon up, professional and careful. She saw Dalton providing rear security, always watching their backs. She saw the whole team moving with coordinated precision that came from months of training together. And then she saw the ambush, the overlapping fields of fire, the coordinated response that proved the insurgents had known exactly when and where Nightfall would breach. 60-plus hostiles when intelligence had promised 12. IED chains that detonated in sequence, cutting off retreat routes. Heavy weapons positioned to create intersecting kill zones that turned the compound into an abattoir. Eleanor's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her journal to hide the tremor. Lillian noticed Eleanor's silence and interpreted it as condescension. "You got input, Blackwood? Or you just going to sit there taking notes like you're documenting our incompetence for some classified report?" The hostility in Lillian's voice snapped Eleanor back to present. She looked up from the blueprint, her eyes focusing on 3 soldiers who had no idea they were planning their own deaths. The professional calculations and strategic considerations evaporated. What remained was something more primal, the same instinct that had driven her to make 4 trips into the Nightfall kill zone. The same desperate need to save people, even when saving them revealed things better left hidden. "Your breach point is a fatal funnel," Eleanor said quietly. Her voice carried weight that went beyond rank or authority. "Intersecting fields of fire from second-floor windows and the northwest stairwell. You'll have 4K IA in the first 30 seconds. Brennan's expression shifted from confidence to defensive anger. "That's pure speculation. The blueprint doesn't show hostile positions. The blueprint doesn't need to show them. The architecture creates natural defensive positions that any competent force will exploit. The main entrance opens into a lobby area with sightlines from 3 elevated positions. Anyone breaching through that door is silhouetted against exterior light, while defenders have concealment and elevation advantage." Eleanor's finger traced routes on the blueprint with unwavering conviction. Second-floor windows here and here provide overlapping coverage of the approach. The stairwell creates a vertical choke point that can be held by 2 defenders against a dozen attackers. And the lobby ceiling is low enough that grenades or flashbangs will have reduced effectiveness while increasing risk of friendly fire injuries. The room had gone silent, all 3 soldiers staring at Eleanor with expressions that mixed surprise, confusion, and suspicion. "How do you know interior layout details that aren't on the blueprint?" Brennan asked, his voice sharp with challenge. Eleanor realized her mistake even as the words left her mouth. She'd provided tactical analysis based on personal experience inside a building that officially didn't exist, outside classified archives. The kind of knowledge that came from walking those corridors, clearing those rooms, learning those lessons in ways that left scars deeper than anything physical. She could deflect, make up some explanation about pattern recognition or structural analysis or intelligence preparation, maintain the careful distance she'd cultivated for 6 weeks. But Hayden was going to walk through that door and die in the same place Hayes had died. Lillian was going to provide communications from the same position where William Crawford had bled out, calling for backup that never came. Brennan was going to take command and make the same mistakes that had turned a 40% success mission into total catastrophe. Eleanor looked at each of them, young soldiers who'd never faced combat that tested everything they believed about their training and capabilities, who thought they understood warfare because they'd qualified on ranges and completed exercises and earned their positions through conventional excellence. They had no idea what real combat looked like, what it felt like to watch people die because intelligence was wrong or command was arrogant, or sometimes just because war didn't care about fairness or competence or who deserved to survive. "Because I've been in that exact building," Eleanor said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Fallujah, March 2003, Operation Nightfall. We lost 11 people to that layout." The silence that followed was absolute. Brennan's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and dawning recognition. Nightfall was classified Black Ops, Special Activities Division. How the hell would you? "I was there. Eleanor's voice remained flat, carefully controlled. I know that building because I carried 3 bodies out of it while taking fire from positions you're planning to walk directly into. Lillian leaned forward, her hostility replaced by professional shock. Nightfall was 2003. You'd have been 22. Eleanor's hands had stopped shaking. Once the secret started coming out, there was strange relief in not having to hide anymore. Lieutenant Blackwood, Special Operations Liaison, youngest member of a 12-person team that intelligence assessment gave less than 40% probability of success. Hayden's voice came out strangled. My uncle worked intelligence for Iraq operations. He said Nightfall was a myth. Conspiracy theory shit. 11 KIA with bodies never recovered. Sole survivor disappeared into classified reassignment. Not a myth. Eleanor turned back to the blueprint, her finger tracing the routes she'd used 21 years ago. The sole survivor is sitting right here, trying to stop you from making the same mistakes that got my team killed. The planning room door opened. A sergeant poked his head in, checked his watch, frowned. Team 7, you've got 15 minutes remaining. Hope you're making progress. The door closed, leaving them in silence that felt heavier than before. Brennan found his voice first. If you've got operational experience with this building, why didn't you say something during the briefing? Because my presence here is classified. Because Operation Nightfall is sealed under presidential authority. Because revealing what I know means compromising security protocols that exist for legitimate reasons. Eleanor's voice hardened slightly, but watching you plan a frontal assault into the same kill zone that murdered 11 operators crosses a line I'm not willing to accept, simulation or not. So what do we do? Lillian asked. Her skepticism had transformed into something else. Not trust exactly, but recognition that they were dealing with someone whose experience exceeded anything they'd imagined. Eleanor studied the blueprint one more time, seeing 2 overlapping images. The architectural drawing with its clean lines and precise measurements, and the memory of that building filled with smoke and blood and the sounds of people dying. Multiple entry points, she said finally. Simultaneous breach from 3 vectors to divide hostile attention. We use the structural features as assets instead of fighting against them. Northwest maintenance access provides concealed approach to second-floor positions. Eastern elevation gives overwatch coverage without sun blindness if we time the assault correctly. Southern utility corridor leads directly to third-floor objective while bypassing the primary kill zones. Hayden's eyes widened. The blueprint doesn't show a maintenance access point or utility corridor. The blueprint shows the official building layout. It doesn't show modifications made during occupation or structural features that aren't documented in public records. Eleanor's voice carried complete certainty. The northwest wall has a welded maintenance hatch, bottom left corner. 3 strikes with a rifle butt at 45-degree angle will compromise the weak point. The utility corridor entrance is concealed behind removable paneling in the southern storage room. How do you know about modifications in concealed features? Brennan's question wasn't hostile anymore. It was the professional inquiry of someone recognizing expertise far beyond their own. Because I helped map that building during pre-mission reconnaissance. Because I used those routes to extract bodies under fire. Because I've had 21 years to remember every detail of the place where everyone I cared about died. Eleanor looked up from the blueprint, meeting their eyes one by one. You want to know who I really am? Fine. I'm the soldier who survived Operation Nightfall by following orders to abandon her team. I'm the operator who made 4 trips into an active kill zone because I couldn't leave them behind. I'm the person who spent 2 decades trying to figure out how to make survival mean something. She turned back to the tactical planning. Right now, what I am is someone who knows how to clear this building without casualties. The question is whether you trust that knowledge enough to follow a plan that contradicts everything your conventional training taught you. Brennan and Hayden exchanged glances, some wordless communication passing between them that acknowledged they were in territory beyond their experience. Lillian spoke for all of them. "What do you need us to do?" The next 15 minutes transformed the planning session. Eleanor's tactical guidance was precise, detailed, and uncompromising. She assigned positions based on individual capabilities they didn't know she'd been assessing for 6 weeks. She outlined timing sequences that required coordination beyond anything they'd practiced. She described the building's defensive characteristics with absolute certainty born from knowledge purchased in blood. Brennan would lead the northwestern approach, using the maintenance access Eleanor described. Hayden would provide elevation overwatch from the eastern position, utilizing his marksmanship skills with specific firing solutions Eleanor provided. Lillian would coordinate communications while managing real-time tactical adjustments from a command position that kept her out of direct fire. And Eleanor would take the southern utility approach to the third-floor objective, moving alone through routes only she knew existed. It was a plan that utilized each person's strengths while minimizing exposure to the kill zones that had destroyed Operation Nightfall. It was tactically sound in ways that went beyond conventional military doctrine. It demonstrated special operations thinking applied to a scenario that looked simple but contained layers of complexity invisible to ordinary assessment. It was also a plan that revealed Eleanor possessed knowledge and capabilities that couldn't be explained through normal military progression. When the sergeant returned to collect them for the live exercise, Team 7 walked out with a coordinated tactical approach that bore no resemblance to Brennan's initial frontal assault. They also walked out knowing that Captain Eleanor Blackwood was something far more than the mysterious transfer who kept to herself and performed training exercises with unsettling competence. The question now was what happened when that knowledge reached people who had the authority to demand answers Eleanor couldn't provide without compromising security that had been maintained for 21 years. The main training yard at Fort Carson had been transformed into an arena. 300 soldiers occupied observation bleachers arranged in a semicircle around the mock Fallujah compound. The afternoon sun beat down with a kind of relentless intensity that turned physical exertion into an additional enemy combatant. Colonel Thornton stood on the elevated command platform, flanked by his evaluation panel. Sergeant Major Patricia Holbrook, 60 years old with a face weathered by 3 decades of military service, including Desert Storm and Gulf War deployments, studied the assembled soldiers with professional assessment. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Pritchard, 55 with Cold War intelligence background, reviewed digital feeds from cameras positioned throughout the training compound. Eleanor stood with her team at the designated equipment station, drawing her assigned weapons with movements that had become automatic decades ago. Mark 12 Special Purpose Rifle, configured for designated marksman role. Suppressor to reduce acoustic signature. High magnification optics for precision fire at extended ranges. The kind of loadout that suggested someone had been paying attention to her capabilities. Brennan, Hayden, and Lillian collected their M4A1 carbines and tactical gear with the nervous energy that preceded any exercise where performance would be publicly evaluated. But their nervous energy carried additional weight now. They knew they were working with someone whose operational experience exceeded anything in their background. Someone whose tactical guidance contradicted their training but came with the absolute certainty of hard-won knowledge. The question was whether that knowledge would translate to success or expose them all to scrutiny they weren't prepared to handle. Thornton's voice echoed across the training yard through speakers mounted on observation towers. Team 7, you are cleared to begin tactical demonstration. 12-minute time limit for hostage extraction. Your performance will be evaluated on tactical soundness, execution efficiency, and collaborative effectiveness. Simulation rounds are loaded. Enhanced marking ammunition will cause pain compliance and visible impact evidence. Treat this as combat conditions. Eleanor felt her heart rate spike, not from fear of the exercise, from the memories it triggered. She'd heard similar mission briefings in Fallujah, stood in similar staging areas surrounded by operators who trusted their training and each other. Believed that intelligence was accurate and command knew what they were doing, and 12 well-trained soldiers could handle anything they encountered. 21 years hadn't dulled the memory of how wrong those assumptions had been. Eleanor moved to her assigned Overwatch position on an adjacent structure, climbing an external ladder with practiced efficiency. The elevated position provided sight lines across the compound's eastern approaches, exactly as she'd briefed the team. From here, she could observe the entire operation while providing covering fire if the automated hostile targets appeared in patterns she anticipated. Through her rifle scope, Eleanor watched Brennan approach the northwest wall, finding the maintenance access point she'd described. He struck the welded hatch 3 times at the precise angle Eleanor had specified. The metal gave way with a groan of stressed steel, revealing the darkened access corridor beyond. Brennan hesitated at the threshold. Eleanor could see his uncertainty even from 200 meters away. This wasn't part of conventional tactics. This was trusting knowledge from a source he still didn't fully understand. Then he entered, weapon up, moving with the careful precision of someone who recognized they were operating beyond their normal capabilities. Hayden established his Overwatch position on the eastern elevation, using the afternoon sun angle Eleanor had calculated to keep glare out of his optics while maintaining coverage of the compound's primary approaches. His positioning was textbook special operations, though he likely didn't realize that's what he was executing. Lillian activated her communication station, establishing the coordination network that would allow real-time tactical adjustments. Her technical expertise was solid, but Eleanor had provided her with frequency protocols and bypass procedures that went beyond standard military communications doctrine. The first 90 seconds proceeded exactly as Eleanor had planned. Brennan moving through the maintenance corridor towards second-floor positions. Hayden scanning for threats with disciplined fire control. Lillian coordinating movements with calm professionalism. On the command platform, Thornton watched with satisfaction. Sometimes direct action worked. Sometimes conventional training produced results without need for complicated special operations mythology. Then the compound's automated defense systems activated. 8 hostile pop-up targets materialize in elevated positions throughout the compound. Not random placement. Precise tactical positioning that created overlapping fields of fire, covering every obvious approach vector. Eleanor's breath caught. Through her scope, she saw Brennan advancing toward an intersection, his movement confident and controlled. In 10 seconds, he would step into the exact position where Captain Jonathan Hayes had taken rounds 21 years ago. The same fatal funnel where the best tactical commander Eleanor had ever known had died covering her extraction. The memory crashed over her with physical force. Hayes stumbling, blood spreading across his desert camouflage. His voice on the radio, calm despite mortal wounds. "Ellie, complete the mission. That's an order." Eleanor's hands trembled on her rifle. Her breathing came in short gasps. The professional control she'd maintained for 6 weeks was cracking under the weight of trauma she'd never properly processed. Her radio crackled with Brennan's voice requesting tactical guidance for the intersection ahead. Eleanor's finger froze on the transmit button. Hayes's voice in her memory, from their last conversation before insertion. "Save them, Lieutenant. If things go wrong, you save as many as you can. Don't let my death be meaningless." Eleanor keyed the radio, her voice shaking in ways she couldn't control. "Brennan, freeze position. Hostiles 11 o'clock high, 2 o'clock mid, 4 o'clock behind stairwell. You have 5 seconds before you're in the kill zone." Brennan stopped instantly. "How do you have visibility on interior positions from exterior Overwatch?" "Move now." Eleanor's command voice emerged, overwhelming the panic attack trying to consume her. "Northwest wall, low crawl 15 meters. Hayden, suppress hostile positions I'm marking. Lillian, I need building sensor override access code 44721. Lillian's response came sharp with shock. How do you know the building access code? Because I said it 21 years ago. Execute. The training yard erupted with murmurs from the observation bleachers. 300 soldiers processing the implications of what they just heard. On the command platform, Sergeant Major Holbrook leaned forward with sudden intensity. Colonel, that's not standard tactical coordination. That's special operations battle management. Pritchard was already pulling up classified database queries on his tablet. Sir, cross-referencing building specifications with historical operations. Operation Nightfall, Fallujah, 2003. 12-person Special Activities Team, 11 KIA, 1 survivor. His face went pale as additional details populated his screen. File is sealed under Presidential Security Directive. Survivor identity classified. Last known assignment. He looked up at Thornton with something close to horror. This facility, evaluation and protocol assessment, authorized 6 weeks ago. Thornton's satisfaction transformed into confusion and dawning dread. Eleanor continued coordinating Team 7's assault with precision that exceeded anything they demonstrated in training. She provided Brennan with specific breach points that bypassed defensive positions. She gave Hayden firing solutions that utilized ricochet angles and geometric calculations beyond standard marksmanship. She guided Lillian through communication protocols that were definitely not in any manual Thornton had ever seen. The hostage extraction that should have taken 12 minutes concluded in 8. 0 simulated casualties. Flawless tactical execution. Perfect coordination. Team 7 emerged from the compound carrying their simulated hostage, their expressions mixing triumph with profound confusion about what they'd just accomplished. In the observation bleachers, soldiers whispered among themselves, trying to process what they'd witnessed. "Who the hell is she?" Brennan whispered to no one in particular. 300 soldiers waited for answers that Thornton couldn't provide. Eleanor descended from her overwatch position with mechanical precision, her body executing the movements while her mind tried to process the adrenaline crash following the panic attack she'd barely controlled. She'd exposed herself, revealed capabilities that couldn't be explained through conventional military progression, demonstrated knowledge of classified operations and tactical protocols that officially didn't exist. The careful anonymity she'd maintained for 6 weeks was gone. The questions she'd avoided were about to become demands she couldn't deflect. And somewhere in the distance, she could hear the distinctive sound of a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter approaching Fort Carson at high speed. Someone important was coming. Someone who'd been monitoring the situation and decided it required immediate personal intervention. Eleanor walked across the training yard toward the command platform where Thornton stood with his evaluation panel. 300 soldiers parted to create a path, their eyes tracking her movement with mixture of awe, confusion, and fear. She'd spent 21 years hiding in classified assignments in sealed files, trying to honor Hayes's final order to survive, while struggling with guilt that surviving meant 11 better soldiers had died. Now the hiding was over. Thornton's voice carried across the training yard with forced authority. "Captain Blackwood, report to the evaluation platform immediately. Your tactical performance requires explanation." Eleanor climbed the platform stairs with steady movements that belied the storm inside her. She stood at attention before Thornton, aware of 300 pairs of eyes watching, waiting to understand who she really was. "Sir," Eleanor said, her voice carefully neutral, "my previous assignments require security verification before detailed discussion." "I'm your commanding officer at this installation," Thornton replied, his voice rising with frustration and fear. "You'll answer my questions about your operational background." Sergeant Major Holbrook intervened with the calm authority of someone who'd seen enough classified operations to recognize when conventional protocols didn't apply. "Colonel Thornton, if Captain Blackwood references compartmented intelligence classifications—" "I will not," Thornton cut her off, his composure cracking under pressure of uncertainty he couldn't control. Tolerate my authority being undermined by classified operatives hiding behind security protocols while operating under false pretenses. He turned his full attention to Eleanor, voice pitched to carry across the assembled soldiers. You've been here 6 weeks under mysterious circumstances, demonstrating capabilities that exceed your documented background, refusing to engage in unit cohesion activities. This battalion deserves answers about who you are and what you're really doing here. Eleanor felt something crack inside her, the careful professional distance that had protected her for 2 decades, the emotional control that had allowed her to function despite carrying 11 ghosts everywhere she went. "Sir," she said, voice breaking slightly for the first time anyone at Fort Carson had witnessed. "I lost 11 teammates because someone violated operational security. I will not compromise protocols that keep soldiers alive." "You'll follow my orders," Thornton shouted, his own control failing. "You want to talk about dead teammates? Prove it." The helicopter sound was closer now, less than 2 minutes out. Thornton made his fatal decision, the choice that would end his career and change everything for Eleanor and expose secrets that had been buried for 21 years under presidential authority. "Captain Eleanor Blackwood," he said with the terrible finality of someone committing to action they couldn't reverse, "I am ordering you to remove your uniform blouse. If you possess operational tattoos, identification marks, or anything that explains your background, we're examining them. Right now, in front of this battalion." The silence that followed was absolute, 300 soldiers holding collective breath. Sergeant Major Holbrook stepped forward, her voice sharp. "Colonel Thornton, that order violates multiple regulations regarding... This soldier has demonstrated covert operational capabilities while refusing credential verification," Thornton interrupted, his voice carrying desperation now. "We have a right to know who's operating among us." Eleanor's hands moved to her uniform blouse zipper. They were trembling again, but this time not from panic attack, from rage, from grief, from 21 years of carrying weight no one should bear alone. Lieutenant Colonel Pritchard tried one last intervention. "Garrett, for God's sake, don't do this. If she's who I think she is..." "That is a direct order, Captain Blackwood." Eleanor unzipped slowly. The blouse fell away, revealing the OD green tank top beneath. For a moment, she stood there, her back to Thornton, facing the assembled soldiers who watched with horrified fascination. Then she turned slightly, adjusting her position in the afternoon heat. Between her shoulder blades, the Iron Eagle emerged into sunlight. A snarling eagle's head, rendered in precise detail. Crossed lightning bolts that formed wings of violent grace. 11 stars arranged in a constellation pattern that looked random to most observers, but carried specific meaning for anyone with knowledge of classified special operations. Beneath the eagle, script in elegant letters, "Nightfall, 12 went in." Roman numerals marking a date, 3/2/2003, March 2nd, 2003. Encircling the design, initials in tiny, precise letters, J.H., M.D., W.C.S., B.T., G, R.M.D., T, M.O.E.S.I.W.A.B. 11 sets of initials, 11 names, 11 soldiers who'd never come home. Sergeant Major Holbrook gasped, her hand covering her mouth. Her eyes had gone wide with recognition and horror. Lieutenant Colonel Pritchard's tablet slipped from his fingers, shattering on the concrete platform. In the observation bleachers, Vivian Ashford whispered in disbelief, "Oh my God, the Fallujah massacre. I thought that was conspiracy theory." Brennan's voice carried across the sudden silence. "What's Nightfall?" Holbrook answered, her voice shaking. 12 operator team, Fallujah, March 2003. Chemical weapons intelligence retrieval mission. They were ambushed by 60-plus insurgents. Official record shows 11 KIA, bodies never recovered under sustained fire. Sole survivor was given classified reassignment, identity sealed under presidential security directive. Hayden stared at Eleanor with new understanding. You were 22 years old. Eleanor stood there exposed, tears streaming silently down her face. Not speaking, not defending, just bearing witness to names tattooed on her body like prayer or penance or both. The UH-60 Blackhawk touched down on the parade ground 200 meters away, rotor wash creating dust clouds that obscured visibility. The helicopter door opened. A figure emerged, uniformed crisp despite the helicopter flight, 4 stars gleaming on shoulders, Medal of Honor ribbon prominent among rows of other decorations. General Robert McKenzie, 68 years old, architect of Operation Nightfall, walked toward the command platform with measured authority that made every soldier snap to attention instinctively. His eyes found Eleanor standing exposed before 300 witnesses. His weathered face showed not anger, but profound grief. The look of someone who'd carried responsibility for 11 deaths across 21 years and never found peace with the weight. Mackenzie climbed the platform stairs. His voice, when he spoke, carried quiet authority that reached every corner of the training yard. Colonel Garrett Thornton, each word precise and heavy with consequence. Who gave you authority to expose a presidential security directive identification tattoo in a public setting? Thornton's face cycled through confusion, recognition, and absolute horror as he understood the magnitude of his mistake. Eleanor remained standing at attention, tears streaming, the Iron Eagle visible to everyone, 11 names displayed like wounds that never healed. And in the silence that followed, 300 soldiers waited to learn the truth about Operation Nightfall, about the young lieutenant who'd survived when 11 better operators died, about the ghosts that Captain Eleanor Blackwood had been carrying alone for 21 years. The truth was coming, all of it, and nothing would ever be the same again. General Robert McKenzie stood on the command platform with the bearing of a man who'd spent 4 decades making decisions that shaped military policy while maintaining public ignorance of operations essential to national defense, but invisible to civilian oversight. The afternoon sun cast his shadow across the concrete like a judgment rendered in silhouette. 300 soldiers remained at attention, barely breathing, sensing they were about to witness something that transcended routine military discipline. This wasn't a training exercise gone wrong. This was history being written in real time. Secrets being exposed that powerful people had worked hard to keep buried. Mackenzie's eyes swept across the assembled battalion before settling on Thornton, with the cold assessment of a surgeon identifying cancer that required immediate excision. Colonel Thornton, Mackenzie said, his voice carrying the measured cadence of absolute authority, you have precisely 10 seconds to explain your decision to publicly expose classified operational identification markings that are protected under Presidential Security Directive 77 Foxtrot. I suggest you use those seconds wisely because your military career likely depends on the quality of your explanation. Thornton's face had gone pale. We beaded on his forehead despite the desert heat he'd grown accustomed to over months at Fort Carson. Sir, I was attempting to clarify discrepancies in Captain Blackwood's background that were affecting unit cohesion and operational effectiveness. Her performance suggested capabilities inconsistent with documented training history. So you ordered her to strip in front of 300 witnesses? Mackenzie's voice remained calm, which somehow made it more terrifying. You thought the appropriate response to questions about a soldier's background was public humiliation and forced exposure of markings you had no clearance to view, no authority to reveal, and no comprehension of the security implications involved in their display? Sir, I didn't know. Exactly, Colonel. You didn't know. And instead of following proper channels for classified personnel verification, instead of contacting the Pentagon offices whose signatures appeared on Captain Blackwood's transfer orders, Instead of exercising even basic judgment about why a soldier's files might be sealed under presidential authority, you decided to assert your ego and demonstrate your command presence. Mackenzie turned toward the assembled soldiers, his voice rising to reach every person in the training yard. Operation Nightfall, March 2nd, 2003. I was Lieutenant Colonel Robert Mackenzie, commanding special activities in the Fallujah Theater of Operations. Intelligence indicated a chemical weapon stockpile in a residential compound, grid designation 47 Baker. We had a 48-hour window before Hussein's regime relocated the assets to locations we couldn't track. He paused, letting the historical context settle over soldiers too young to remember the early days of the Iraq invasion, when every intelligence report suggested weapons of mass destruction that justified the entire war. I handpicked 12 operators for the mission, the best I had access to, Tier 1 capabilities across the board. The youngest was a 22-year-old lieutenant named Eleanor Blackwood, promoted in the field for tactical analysis capabilities that exceeded officers with twice her experience. She'd identified patterns in insurgent behavior that saved American lives in 3 prior operations. She had a gift for seeing what others missed. Eleanor stood motionless, her back still exposed, the Iron Eagle visible to everyone. Tears continued streaming down her face, but she made no sound. 21 years of carefully maintained control had shattered, leaving only raw grief and memories she could no longer contain. Mackenzie's voice took on a harder edge. Intelligence assessment gave us less than 40% probability of mission success. High risk, high value target. The kind of operation where you send your best people and hope they're good enough to beat the odds. We inserted at 2300 hours on March 1st. Standard infiltration, no complications. The team reached the compound, established positions, prepared for breach. The general's weathered face showed emotion for the first time. Not anger, something deeper and more painful. Lieutenant Blackwood identified thermal signatures inconsistent with intelligence estimates. Instead of 12 hostiles as briefed, her analysis suggested 40-plus combatants inside the compound. She reported this to Captain Jonathan Hayes, the team leader. Hayes had 2 choices: abort the mission based on a junior officer's assessment that contradicted official intelligence, or trust the briefing from command and execute as planned. Mackenzie's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but in the absolute silence of the training yard, every word carried. Hayes chose to execute, and 30 seconds after breach, the team walked into an ambush that intelligence either missed or never properly assessed. Not 12 hostiles, 60-plus, with coordinated defensive positions, overlapping fields of fire, and IED chains that cut off retreat routes. The general pulled a tablet from his aide's hands, tapping controls that sent images to the large displays positioned around the training yard. Grainy footage appeared, night vision, thermal imaging, the chaotic hell of close-quarters combat in confined spaces where every corner could hide death. Soldiers in the observation bleachers leaned forward, watching tactical footage that was clearly real combat, not training exercise. The distinctive crack of AK-47 fire, the deeper thump of RPG launches. Radio chatter growing increasingly desperate as a well-planned operation deteriorated into a desperate fight for survival. Captain Hayes recognized immediately that extraction was impossible with the package secured, Mackenzie continued. He made the hardest decision any commander faces. He ordered Lieutenant Blackwood to secure the intelligence laptop and extract alone. She was the fastest, the smallest, the one with the best chance of making it out alive. The footage showed a figure moving through smoke-filled corridors with desperate speed, dragging someone wounded. Eleanor flinched watching it, her body remembering even if her mind tried to forget. Lieutenant Blackwood refused the order, Mackenzie said. She made 4 trips into that compound while under sustained fire. 4 trips into an active kill zone to extract wounded and recover bodies. The first trip, she brought out Lieutenant Marcus Dalton, wounded with multiple gunshot injuries. He died in the extraction helicopter 6 hours later. She held his hand the entire time. Eleanor's legs trembled. Sergeant Major Holbrook moved quietly to her side, not touching, just present in case she collapsed. Second trip, she went back for Sergeant William Crawford, who'd taken shrapnel from an IED and was bleeding out in a first-floor corridor. She applied tourniquets under fire, dragged him to the extraction point. He died before they reached safety. Blood loss too severe, damage too extensive. The footage continued playing, thermal signatures showing impossible bravery or impossible stupidity, or maybe both at once. Third trip, she attempted to reach Corporal Sarah Brennan, a medic who'd been providing combat casualty care when she took a headshot from a second-floor position. Brennan was 24 years old, wanted to teach history after her service was complete. Eleanor reached her body, confirmed she was gone, and came back out with Brennan's medical pack because other wounded needed supplies. Mackenzie's voice cracked slightly. Fourth trip, Eleanor went back for Captain Hayes. He'd been providing covering fire for the team's withdrawal, taking rounds meant for others. By the time Eleanor reached him, he'd sustained injuries incompatible with survival. She dragged his body out anyway, took fire that grazed her throat. He pointed to the faint scar visible on Eleanor's neck, and nearly died in the process. The general turned off the footage. The displays went dark, leaving only the afternoon sun and 300 soldiers processing information that rewrote everything they thought they understood about combat and courage and what separated ordinary soldiers from something transcendent. The laptop Eleanor extracted contained a complete chemical weapons distribution network, names, locations, transfer protocols. That intelligence prevented WMDs from reaching al-Qaeda cells operating in 6 different countries. Conservative estimates suggest the information saved 50,000 civilian lives from chemical weapons attacks that were in active planning stages. Mackenzie approached Eleanor, his voice gentling. We awarded her the Silver Star for valor under fire. She threw it at me during the ceremony, told me to give it to Captain Hayes' widow and 2 daughters because she didn't deserve medals for being the only one who survived when 11 better soldiers died. Eleanor's voice emerged for the first time since the general's arrival, raw and broken. They were better. Hayes was the finest tactical commander I've ever known. Dalton watched everyone's backs like we were family. Crawford could defuse any explosive and told terrible jokes even when we were terrified. Brennan saved 3 soldiers' lives before the ambush even started. Her voice trailed off into silence. Mackenzie continued speaking to the assembled battalion. Captain Blackwood has been at Fort Carson for 6 weeks under my direct orders, operating under presidential directive to evaluate training protocols and tactical doctrine. Her mission was to identify weaknesses in our preparation that could get soldiers killed in actual combat. She was supposed to observe quietly, document problems, and report findings without revealing her background or capabilities. He turned cold eyes on Thornton. And you just forced her to expose 21 years of classified service because you couldn't handle a soldier who made you look inadequate by comparison. The words hung in the desert air like a sentence being pronounced. Mackenzie's aide stepped forward with a leather portfolio containing documents that bore official seals and classified markings. Colonel Garrett Thornton, you are hereby relieved of command pending court-martial proceedings on the following charges. Unauthorized exposure of classified identification markings, violation of Presidential Security Directive protocols, conduct unbecoming an officer, abuse of command authority resulting in security compromise. Thornton opened his mouth to protest, but Mackenzie cut him off with a gesture. You will surrender your command immediately and report to the Provost Marshal. Your security clearances are suspended pending investigation. You are not to discuss this incident with anyone outside official inquiry channels. Do you understand these orders? Yes, sir, Thornton whispered, his career ending in real time before 300 witnesses. Mackenzie turned to the assembled soldiers. Sergeant Vivian Ashford, step forward. Vivian emerged from the observation bleachers, her earlier confidence replaced by visible fear. She'd been watching the proceedings with growing horror, understanding that her campaign against Eleanor had contributed to this disaster. Sergeant Ashford, you are charged with harassment of a superior officer operating under classified authority. Captain Blackwood's actual rank and position exceeded your own, a fact that would have been clear if you'd spent less time building coalitions against her and more time examining your own performance. You are reassigned to administrative duties effective immediately. You will never hold leadership positions over other soldiers. This limitation is permanent and will follow you throughout your remaining service. Vivian's face crumbled, but she managed to whisper, "Yes, sir." Corporal Brennan, Private Sinclair, Specialist Mercer stepped forward. The three members of Team 7 approached with expressions mixing shame and confusion. They'd been part of the coalition against Eleanor, but they'd also just experienced her tactical genius firsthand during the exercise. You three are receiving formal reprimands for participating in harassment of classified personnel. However, Mackenzie's voice softened slightly, you demonstrated capacity for adaptation during today's exercise. You listened when Captain Blackwood provided tactical guidance, even though it contradicted your training and challenged your assumptions. That capacity for growth will determine whether you have futures in this military. He gestured toward Eleanor. Captain Blackwood will be conducting tactical training seminars over the next month. You three are assigned to assist her. Learn from someone who survived situations that would have killed most soldiers. Maybe you'll become the kind of operators who can pass that knowledge to the next generation. Brennan spoke quietly. Sir, we owe Captain Blackwood an apology. We judged without understanding. We saw her silence as arrogance when it was, he struggled for words. PTSD, Mackenzie supplied. Survivor's guilt. Trauma that doesn't respond to conventional treatment because the wounds are carved into identity itself. Captain Blackwood has carried 11 ghosts for 21 years while trying to honor their sacrifice by preventing others from dying the same way. Your judgment made that burden heavier. The general pulled Eleanor aside, his voice dropping to tones only she could hear. Ellie, you can't carry them alone anymore. Hayes, Dalton, Crawford, Brennan, the others, they're gone. You survived. That wasn't weakness or failure or cosmic injustice. That was Hayes making the hardest decision a commander can make. He chose you to survive because he knew what you'd become. Eleanor's voice came out broken. I was the youngest. I should have died first. Why did Johnny save me? Because Jonathan Hayes was a brilliant tactical commander who saw potential in a 22-year-old analyst that she couldn't see in herself. He knew you'd spend the rest of your life trying to make survival mean something. And look what you built. Mackenzie produced another folder, this one containing orders that would reshape Eleanor's career and life. Pentagon is creating a new position, Director of Tactical Doctrine Command, complete authority to redesign training protocols across all service branches. Your assessments become military standard. Your lessons get taught to every soldier before they deploy. Eleanor stared at the documents like they were written in a language she didn't understand. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see them die. I hear Hayes telling me to leave him. I feel Dalton's hand going cold while I promised I'd tell his wife he loved her. Then let those memories serve a purpose. Mackenzie's voice carried the weight of someone who understood trauma from personal experience. Jonathan Hayes' daughters, Jennifer and Amanda, they're 26 and 24 now. They've written me every year since their father died, asking what his sacrifice meant, what it accomplished, whether his death mattered. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face. I can't face them. How do I tell them their father died giving me an order I refused to follow? That I wasted time trying to save others when he told me to complete the mission first. You tell them their father made 4 soldiers survive long enough for you to reach them. That he held a position against impossible odds so you could make those trips. that Marcus Dalton lived 6 extra hours because of your first aid, that the intelligence you extracted prevented chemical weapons from killing 50,000 innocent people, that their father's last order to you was to make survival matter, and you've spent 21 years trying to honor that command. Mackenzie's voice gentled even further. Jennifer wants to join the military. She's been asking me about special operations, about following her father's path. Amanda is studying tactical analysis at the War College. They're not looking for someone to blame, Ellie. They're looking for connection to a father they barely remember. They want to meet the soldier he died protecting. Eleanor's professional control shattered completely. Mackenzie caught her as her legs gave out, holding her while 21 years of carefully contained grief finally broke through walls that could no longer contain it. The assembled soldiers watched their mysterious, competent, untouchable Captain Blackwood collapse into very human tears in a general's arms. And something shifted in how they understood strength and survival and the cost of service that went beyond anything they'd imagined. 5 years passed with the speed of military transformation when proper authority removed bureaucratic obstacles. Eleanor's position as Director of Tactical Doctrine Command gave her unprecedented power to reshape how America trained its warriors. The statistics told part of the story. Special operations casualty rates dropped 43%. Training facility fatalities, soldiers dying during preparation for combat, decreased 67%. Mission success rates across all service branches improved 51%. Protocol redesigns totaling 127 separate doctrine changes filtered through every level of military training. But statistics couldn't capture the cultural transformation Eleanor initiated. Her core principle, never underestimate capability based on surface appearance, never assume silence means weakness, never mistake quiet competence for lack of dedication, became foundational doctrine taught to every new recruit. The Iron Eagle tattoo that had ended her anonymity became a symbol throughout military culture. Not something soldiers replicated, but something they understood represented service beyond recognition, sacrifice without celebration, and the principle that the most dangerous operators were often those who appeared least threatening until circumstances required their capabilities. Eleanor's training facility visits became legendary. She had an instinct for identifying soldiers who reminded her of herself at 22. Quiet, competent, isolated, carrying burdens they couldn't articulate. At Fort Bragg on a humid Carolina morning, Eleanor observed a formation of new recruits completing advanced tactical certification. One soldier caught her attention immediately. Female, late 20s, perfect scores across every evaluation, eating alone, never speaking unless required. The platoon instructor was preparing to counsel the soldier about poor team integration when Eleanor intervened. "Let me talk to her," Eleanor said quietly. The instructor recognized Director Blackwood and stepped aside immediately. Eleanor's reputation preceded her everywhere now. The woman who'd survived Operation Nightfall, the operator who'd redesigned how America trained for war, the living reminder that capability often wore unexpected faces. Eleanor sat beside the young soldier in the mess hall, not speaking immediately, just present. Finally, the soldier looked up from her meal with wary eyes that held depths suggesting experience beyond her apparent age. "Ma'am," the soldier asked cautiously, "what was his name?" Eleanor's question was gentle, carrying certainty that made assumptions unnecessary. The soldier's face crumbled slightly. "How did you know?" "The way you maintain your rifle, like every motion is a prayer. The way you sit alone but watch everyone. The way you perform perfectly but take no joy in excellence. I know because I've been exactly where you are." The soldier's voice came out broken. "My brother, Sergeant William Hartwell, training accident last year. I was supposed to be there. I could have prevented it if I just—" Eleanor held up a hand, stopping the spiral of guilt and self-recrimination. "What was his name? Not his rank, his name." "Billy." Everyone called him Billy. Tell me about Billy. Not about how he died. Tell me who he was. Over the next hour, Eleanor listened while the soldier talked about a brother who'd loved terrible action movies, who'd called their mother every Sunday without fail, who'd believed service mattered more than personal ambition. And slowly, through the telling, the soldier's isolation began cracking. I thought staying silent honored him, the soldier finally said. I thought if I just performed perfectly and never complained and never failed, somehow that would make his death mean something. Eleanor recognized the logic. She'd lived it for 21 years. Let me tell you about my team, Eleanor said softly. Jonathan Hayes, we called him Johnny. He was 38, father of 2 daughters. He taught me everything about tactical command, made terrible dad jokes during mission prep, believed absolutely that leadership meant putting your soldiers' lives ahead of your own. She continued through all 11 names, providing details that humanized each person beyond their operational roles. Marcus Dalton's obsession with science fiction novels, William Crawford's terrible singing voice, Sarah Brennan's dream of teaching history, each name a person, not just a casualty statistic. The silence doesn't honor them, Eleanor concluded. Teaching others does. Making sure the next generation survives to build their own legacies does. Billy would want you to live fully, not exist as a memorial to his death. The soldier, Specialist Jessica Hartwell, Eleanor learned, looked at the director of Tactical Doctrine Command with new understanding. How do you do it? How do you carry them and still function? By making survival mean something. By teaching lessons learned in blood so others don't pay the same price. By accepting that grief doesn't disappear, but purpose can transform it into something that saves lives. Eleanor stood, preparing to return to her official duties. You're assigned to my next tactical seminar, 6 weeks, intensive training and protocols that kept me alive when 11 better soldiers died. You'll learn what Billy would have wanted you to know. Then you'll teach it to someone else. That's how we honor the dead. We keep them alive by making sure their lessons survive. Jessica nodded, tears streaming, but something like hope emerging through the grief. 3 months later, Eleanor was working late in her Pentagon office when her assistant announced an unexpected visitor. Ma'am, there's a civilian here. Says he has an appointment, but I don't see it on your calendar. Eleanor looked up from tactical assessment reports to see Garrett Thornton standing in her doorway. 5 years had aged him significantly. Gray hair, deeper lines around his eyes, the bearing of someone who'd learned hard lessons through personal catastrophe. He wore civilian clothes, business casual, unremarkable, the uniform of someone who'd left military service and found purpose elsewhere. Director Blackwood, Thornton said carefully, I don't expect you to give me time, but I'd appreciate 5 minutes if you can spare them. Eleanor studied him silently, then gestured to the chair across from her desk. Sit. Thornton sat, his movements cautious, like someone approaching something dangerous. I've been working with veteran transition programs for the past 4 years, helping soldiers find purpose after service, especially those who left under difficult circumstances. How's that going? Eleanor's voice was neutral, giving nothing. Better than I deserve. One of the veterans I'm mentoring is a Marine, 23 years old, deploying to Syria next month. His tactical training used protocols you designed. The Blackwood Doctrine, they call it. Real-time, tactical adaptation, emphasis on junior soldier initiative, trust in field intelligence over command assumptions. Thornton's voice carried genuine emotion. That kid is going to survive situations that would have killed Marines a decade ago because you rebuilt how we train. Because you took 21 years of survivor's guilt and transformed it into systematic excellence that saves lives. Eleanor's expression softened slightly. What do you want, Garrett? To apologize. Really apologize. Not the bullshit performance I'd give to protect my career. I measured competence by conformity, saw your difference as threat instead of asset, built a case against you because you made me feel inadequate, then hid that insecurity behind concerns about unit cohesion. He met her eyes directly. I humiliated you in front of 300 soldiers because my ego mattered more than protocol or basic human decency. I exposed trauma you'd carried privately for 2 decades because I couldn't handle a subordinate whose capabilities exceeded my understanding. There's no excuse for that. I'm sorry. Eleanor studied him silently, then spoke with unexpected gentleness. You made mistakes, Garrett. Cost yourself everything, but you learned from it. That's more than most people manage. Your program has saved lives, Thornton continued. The veteran I mentioned, his name is Connor. He talks about the Blackwood Doctrine like it's scripture. Tactical flexibility, trust field assessment, never assume intelligence is complete. He's going to come home because you turned survival into teachable doctrine. Eleanor's voice carried weight when she responded. Captain Hayes would be proud of you, Garrett. Not for what you were 5 years ago, but for what you became after failing. Growth takes courage. Using failure to help others takes character. Thornton's eyes glistened. Thank you for that. I don't deserve it, but thank you. After he left, Eleanor returned to her desk and the endless stream of tactical assessments requiring review. But her mind wandered to the wall of photographs across from her workspace. The original Operation Nightfall team photo occupied the center position. 12 operators in desert camouflage, young and confident and completely unaware that 11 of them had less than 48 hours to live. Surrounding that central image were dozens of other photographs. Graduating classes from tactical seminars Eleanor had personally conducted. Soldiers who'd survived deployments using protocols she'd designed. Letters from family members thanking her for training that brought loved ones home alive. And in the corner, a framed letter from Jennifer and Amanda Hayes, Captain Jonathan Hayes' daughters, now 26 and 24 years old. Eleanor had met them 3 years earlier, 18 years after Fallujah, a meeting she'd postponed for so long out of shame and grief. The letter read, Director Blackwood, thank you for finally telling us about Dad. Not the sanitized version from official casualty notifications, but who he really was. The jokes he told, the way he cared for his team, the decision he made to save you because he knew you'd spend your life honoring that sacrifice. We understand now what his death meant. Not just the intelligence you extracted, but the thousands of soldiers who've survived because you turned his final order into a life's mission. He would be so proud of you. We are too. Please stop apologizing for surviving. You've made his sacrifice matter in ways beyond anything he could have imagined. Jennifer and Amanda Hayes. Eleanor traced the words with her finger, tears streaming as they always did when she read the letter. 21 years since Fallujah. 21 years of carrying 11 ghosts. But finally, slowly, she was learning to transform that weight into something beyond survival. Her desk phone rang, secure line, Pentagon routing. Eleanor answered to find General Mackenzie's voice. Ellie, we've got a situation developing. High-risk extraction. Damascus. Civilian intelligence assets compromised behind enemy lines. They're assembling a team and want your tactical assessment before insertion. Eleanor pulled up the classified briefing materials on her computer, her mind already analyzing terrain, approach vectors, extraction routes. The operational planning that had kept her alive through impossible situations and failed to save 11 people she'd loved. Send me everything, Eleanor said. Full intelligence package, team composition, asset locations, threat assessment. I'll have recommendations within 6 hours. Ellie, Mackenzie's voice gentled. Are you sure? This is Syria. Similar operational profile to Nightfall. If it triggers, it always triggers, General. Every operation, every assessment, every time I close my eyes. But Hayes ordered me to make survival matter. This is how I do that. I make sure the next generation comes home. Eleanor worked through the night, analyzing the Damascus operation with expertise earned through decades of experience and refined through 21 years of asking, what she could have done differently in Fallujah. She identified 14 protocol modifications that would improve probability of successful extraction. She flagged intelligence gaps that needed verification before commitment. She provided alternative approach vectors that reduced exposure to ambush scenarios. And when she submitted her assessment, she included a personal note to the team commander. Trust your junior personnel if they report inconsistencies between intelligence and field observation. Hayes taught me that lesson in the hardest way possible. Don't let your operators pay that price again. 3 weeks later, she received confirmation that the Damascus extraction succeeded with 0 casualties. 14 protocol modifications implemented. Intelligence gaps verified and addressed before insertion. Junior soldier field assessment led to route adjustment that avoided prepared ambush. The team commander's note was brief. Your protocols saved 6 American lives and 4 intelligence assets. Hayes would be proud. We all are. Eleanor added the note to her wall of photographs, another piece of evidence that survival could mean something beyond guilt and grief. That night, alone in her quarters, Eleanor opened the locked box containing the original Nightfall team photo. She traced each face with familiar reverence, whispering names like prayers. Jonathan, Marcus, William, Sarah, Thomas, Rachel, David, Michael, Elizabeth, Isaac, Alexandra. But this time the litany felt different. Not just memorial or penance, but acknowledgement and gratitude and continuation. Rest easy, warriors, Eleanor whispered to 11 faces frozen in time. We've got the watch now. Your lessons live. Your sacrifice matters. And every soldier who comes home because of protocols you died teaching me, that's your legacy continuing. She closed the box and locked it, then opened her computer to review training assessments for the next tactical seminar. 47 new students, each one someone who'd survived situations that would have killed them a decade ago. Because 11 operators had died in Fallujah, and one survivor had spent 21 years making that death mean something. The Iron Eagle tattoo on Eleanor's back carried 11 stars, representing 11 lives. But those stars now illuminated thousands of others. Soldiers trained in protocols learned through sacrifice. Warriors surviving because someone had transformed trauma into systematic excellence. Lives saved because Eleanor Blackwood had finally learned what Captain Jonathan Hayes knew when he gave his final order. Survival wasn't the punishment for being the only one who lived. It was the opportunity to ensure others didn't pay the same price. The chance to honor the dead by protecting the living. The sacred duty to carry lessons learned in blood and transform them into doctrine that saved lives across decades and continents and conflicts yet to come. 11 went into that Fallujah compound on March 2nd, 2003. Only one came back. But that one had ensured thousands more would return home to families who'd never know the names of the soldiers whose sacrifice made survival possible. Eleanor Blackwood, Director of Tactical Doctrine Command, formerly Captain Eleanor Blackwood, formerly Lieutenant Eleanor Blackwood, sole survivor of Operation Nightfall, closed her computer and allowed herself something she denied for 21 years. Peace with survival. Acceptance that living when others died wasn't betrayal, but responsibility. Understanding that the 11 stars tattooed between her shoulder blades weren't just memorial, but mission continuing through every soldier she trained, every protocol she designed, every life saved by lessons learned in the place where everyone she loved had died. The Iron Eagle spread its wings across her back, 11 stars burning bright, and Eleanor whispered one final prayer to the ghost she'd carry forever. Thank you for the order to survive. I finally understand what you knew I'd become. Rest easy, warriors. Your watch is ended. Mine continues. And every sunrise I see is another day to make your sacrifice matter. In barracks and forward operating bases across the world, young soldiers trained under the Blackwood Doctrine learning tactical excellence from protocols written in blood and refined through decades of survivors' determination to ensure no one else paid the price she'd witnessed in Fallujah. They didn't know Eleanor's full story. They'd never seen the Iron Eagle tattoo or understood the weight of 11 names carried between her shoulder blades. They just knew that somewhere in the Pentagon, a director whose tactical assessments saved lives had redesigned how America prepared for war. And that was enough. That was everything. That was 21 years of grief transformed into purpose that would outlive Eleanor herself, carrying forward the legacy of 11 warriors who died so one could survive to teach thousands how to live. The end of one story, the continuation of 11 others. And the promise that sacrifice, when honored properly, never truly ends. It echoes forward through time, saving lives in conflicts yet to come, protecting soldiers yet unborn, ensuring that the price paid in blood purchases something worth the cost. Eleanor Blackwood had finally learned to live with the Iron Eagle, and in learning that, she'd given meaning to every star, every name, every ghost she'd carry until her own watch finally ended.